Brock University acknowledges the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within land protected by a dish with one spoon, one palm agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendships of Indigenous people. Good morning, and welcome to this session of Business Breeders, a live webinar series hosted by Goodman Group at Brock University. My name is Abdul Rahimi, and it's my distinct pleasure to serve as the director of Goodman Group at Brock University. Goodman Group is a community-focused learning and development services provider that works to support professionals, businesses, and entrepreneurs pursuing growth through professional development certificate programs, executive education consulting services, and support for the many entrepreneurs and startups. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's session as you take a break with us. This webinar series aims to provide 4 to 5 minute breathers that are filled with insightful discussions on timely topics that are relevant to businesses and everyday lives, led by award-winning Brock University faculty and leading industry experts. All of them are encouraging thoughtful debates while keeping us connected as we work through this. Momentarily, I will introduce our distinguished speaker for today's session, and thank you to all of you for whom you have submitted your questions at the time of registration. And for those watching us live, feel free to type in your questions into the chat feature, and the chat feature is open now. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's speaker, and that's Tim Arnold. Tim has spent over 2 decades helping leaders manage complexity, increase resilience, and deliver results with clients that include the United Nations, Royal Bank of Canada, Allstate Insurance, Compassion International, Toyota, and Siemens. After running both a for-profit business and a homeless shelter, he leverages his real-world experience to help organizations pursue both profit and purpose. Tim's work focuses on helping leaders unleash the power of both and thinking in an either-or world. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you so much, and it is fantastic to be here. This morning, I started my business career at Brock many years ago. 92 is when I decided to come to Niagara, and still live here today. And it's an honor to be with you and the Goodman Group. And my guess is even some people I know listening in today. So really excited about this talk. I think you're going to find it pretty relevant and timely. And my challenge, I guess commitment to you, is that it's going to be actionable. I want to give you 1 or 2 things that you can try right away. So thanks again for the opportunity. Here's what I want us to do. I want you to think for a moment. It'll actually serve you well if you have a Post-it note or a scratch piece of paper, because I'm going to ask you a few questions as we go. First question is this, and this is, I've been told that when you are in a group of professionals, don't discuss religion, don't discuss politics, and don't ask people to define what a leader is. Well, I'm going to challenge one of those. I want you right now just to think for a moment, what is a leader if you had to narrow it down to 2 characteristics? 2 characteristics that you would say, that's a leader. This is what it takes to be a leader. I'll just give you a second to think about it. You know as well as I do, there's no one right answer, but I'd like you to think about your answer. All right, so keep that close. I'm going to either affirm what you wrote down, or I might even add a little bit, because I've spent quite a few years thinking about this, doing some research around it, and I believe that more than anything else, when it comes to leadership, whether we're leading people, teams, or organizations, or whether we're leading projects, on one hand, it's responsibility. Leaders are responsible. You may even have a lot of people that are part of something, but you know that the weight is on your shoulders. A lot of people don't realize it, but you know it. And then I think the other side of leadership for me is this drive to make a difference. I think that leaders have this kind of instinctive drive to make a difference in sometimes the people that work with them, through the work that they do, the project that they're leading. So it's this combination of responsibility, willing to take that on, and this drive to make a difference. And, I've seen this lived out now for decades. I've seen, in the work I do, consulting and training, I get to do emerging leader programs. So I go all over the world, and whether I'm in Ghana or India or here in Ontario, I see the same thing. When you have a emerging leader, they're a sponge. They got a million questions. You finish the session and you know that if you stay for lunch, you're going to just be swarmed with, how does this apply to my team or maybe my situation at home? It's not just at work though. I would see that responsibility, difference-making drive lived out in everyone in the community. I spent 10 years running a homeless shelter here in Niagara. And every day when I would show up, before I got there, there were volunteers. We had about 250 each week. Busy people, many of them professionals, but they carved out a little bit of time to say, I am going to try my best, whether I'm cooking breakfast, playing cards with our residents, whatever it is, I'm going to be responsible because I really want to make a difference. So I've looked at people, these emerging leaders, people leaders, project leaders, but here's what's troubled me. And this is actually what led me to deciding to write this recent book, Lead with And. In the last, I would say 10 years, I have gotten to meet a lot of the leaders whom I've most admired. People whose books I've read, folks who, years ago I watched their TED Talk or whatever it may be, some people in the community. And I see something commonly that was troubling. I found that when you get to see these leaders off camera, they're not in front of their team or they're not talking to the community, it's behind the curtain, you're offhand. Two things were disturbingly common. One is that they were just burnt out. The toll of leadership, that responsibility, that drive had really taken a negative toll on even their mental health, their marriages, their sense of peace and well-being, or they were just bitter. Just this overarching feeling of resentment or bitterness, whether it was at the organization they worked for, or even maybe the people they served, leadership had taken a significant toll. So I spent time saying, why is this? We have this drive to make a difference. We really want to take responsibility on, but the long game isn't very encouraging. What's going on here? There's lots of reasons that may be the case, but I'm going to suggest to you that the number one reason that leaders either burn out or end up downright bitter is that they are over-focusing on what I refer to and many others call an either-or approach. Their leadership paradigm is that things are either-or. Now, here's the thing. This didn't happen by chance. We live, I'm going to just throw some slides up for a little bit here. We live in an either-or world, and it started long before you even knew it was happening. What happens in our environment is that we start by, learning on the school ground, or in the sports team in the community. This is me, I think, at age 10. If you're on a team, you want to be on the winning team because at the end of the day, or by the time recess is over, you're going to be a winner or you're going to be a loser. It's either one or the other, and you just want to be on the winning team. Well, it goes on to be indoctrinated to us through education. I think Goodman's probably challenging this, but, most of the time we assume that, you get that test and things are right or wrong. I came to Brock to study accounting, and I learned that if I don't choose the right answer, I could lose my job. Never mind, my clients could go to jail. So ultimately, things are right or wrong, and you just need to pick the right answer. Well, you bring other factors of life. For me, even my faith upbringing was one that taught me from a young age that, ultimately things are good or evil. So by the time you enter the workplace, by the time you're in any kind of a leadership role, life has generally taught you to believe that, things are either or. You're a winner or a loser. Things are right or wrong. Things are good or evil. Now, please hear me when I say this is a good thing. As a leader, you need to hold on to that either or perspective every single day. I also, though, will tell you that it's incomplete because you knew as well as I do that there are some situations in life where, this either or approach, it just doesn't cut it. I after finishing university, getting some work, and I got to a place in my 20s where, I think I was a pretty effective either or leader, but things weren't going well. not only at work, personally as well. And I just kept thinking, what am I missing here? And I remember a friend of mine sent me something to read. And, it was about, a spirited life, but it wasn't coming from a religious connotation. It was just saying to live your life with vitality, with energy, to be inspirited, you got to be thinking this way. I'm going to read it with you. And if you can't see the font, I'll say it out loud. It just said to be a spiritual life or an inspirited, vital life. It means that we've got to live our lives in polarity. It means that we're at ease in in-between spaces, between traditional and progressive viewpoints, between rational and emotional responses, between taking action and sometimes just being there, between solitude and leisure, between fasting and feast, between discipline and wildness. It goes on to say, if you're not growing in your spiritual life, and I would argue your leadership, you get stuck in one end of the spectrum or the other, and you end up bland, lukewarm, mediocre, and isolated. The only way to live a spiritual life is to be able to touch both sides at the same time, becoming more aware of who we are, whom we choose to be, and in challenging times, how we show up. Well, this and approach, not either or, but this and approach, this was just paradigm shifting to me. What was fascinating, though, weren't just the words. It was actually, this was written in 1515. Somehow I had missed this whole kind of worldview that wasn't either or, but was instead both and. Learning to hold values in tension. And, this shows up in research, in literature, in leadership development. I was reading Obama's memoir recently, and he talks about it almost in every single chapter. He says the transformational skill of leadership is to hold opposites in tension. It makes us better leaders, better partners, even better parents. And what I'm going to suggest, and we can play this out, as Abdul said, ask questions as we go, and I'll make sure there's time at the end to speak to those questions. But I believe that as a leader, whether you're leading people or whether you're leading projects, there are 6 unavoidable tensions, 6 challenges that you will face. I don't care what you do, whether it's for profit, not for profit, government, these are unavoidable. And if you use that either or approach, which you've been conditioned and rewarded to often use, you will not succeed long term. In fact, that is the path to burnout or becoming downright bitter. So I'm going to talk them through with you. And then in the time that we have, I'm going to just work through one, because I think by seeing one, you'll realize that, wow, that applies to all 6 of them. So the first one is one that my guess is all of you in the last 2 years have had to push yourself on. How do I stay optimistic? How do I kind of stay full of hope and let people know that the future will actually serve us well? And at the same time, as Admiral Stockdale said in Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, face the brutal facts of my current reality, whatever they may be. Not be optimistic or realistic, be optimistic and realistic. Another one that really you've had to push yourself on is, through the pandemic, we have had to change and adapt and pivot and other overused words to make sure not only will we survive, but we serve our clients and our community well. But as a leader that whole time you've been constantly saying we can't lose what we're known for. We can't do this to the expense of team culture. We do need to change, and we got to hold on to stability at the same time. One that, whether you're in the for-profit world or not, there's this idea of keeping your eyes on the bottom line, making sure that the margin is working in your favor, but never the neglect of purpose. Simon Sinek talks about our why we do what we do, and, the essence of how we make a difference. Not choosing one side or the other, but both. Another one, and we're going to go a little deeper here, because I chatted with a few people who I know are watching today, and for whatever reason, it sounds like this one stands out to a few of you. So I'll speak to that. But as a leader, how do I have high expectations on myself, pushing on my team, my organization, and equally high levels of grace? When I say grace, I would be talking about just understanding and empathy and realizing that kind of life happens and that's okay. Just rounding out the list, and this is one, probably there's a few people that need to hear this today. Leadership is about having an others orientation, taking care of, the stakeholders, the community, your clients, your team. Never mind what you walk home to at the end of the day. You're constantly focused on caring for others, but you know as well as I do that if all I do is care for others and I don't care for myself, nobody wins long term. So how do I do both those things? Now, it's not about 50-50. It still may be strongly weighted towards others, but how do I make sure both sides get what they need? And then finally, one that I think is interesting, because leadership requires confidence. Leadership often is taking people where they wouldn't go otherwise, and they have to know that you have an idea of where you're going based on your experience, your research, your infrastructure, your strategy. And effective leadership also is recognizing I've always got more to learn. There's always a new way of looking at something. I heard the term the other day, if a leader is willing and commonly saying, or is not willing to say, I don't know, they'll prove it through their actions. We've got to do both. So what I want you to do, and this is where that scratch paper comes in, just jot down the one that you would say, oh, wow, yeah, that for me, or for my team, that tension. The rest, they all make sense, but that one, we should be talking more about that. And what I want you to do is I'm going to, in the time that we have left, walk through a few things that you can do to not just be aware of the tension, but to actually manage it well. I use the term, you can lead with and. All right, so I'm going to focus on this idea of expectations and grace. And the only reason that I'm going to do that, there's two. One is I talked to a few people in this call, and it seems like that's a strong one for a few of you. This is the one for me that's the hardest. It's so important in the work I do, and yet it can be mismanaged. My either or kind of chooses expectations by default. That part comes easy to me. Expectations on myself, expectations on others. Grace is a discipline. It's a challenge towards myself and towards others. So with that in mind, here's what I'm going to do. The first thing that you want to do is identify one, and then you want to understand it. So this mapping activity, you can change the words expectations, grace with self, others, profit, purpose. You put in any tension, and then you on your own or with your team can do exactly what we'll do right here. We're going to start by saying, okay, let's talk about expectations. What's the positive results of expectations? Well, I can tell you lots. I mean, one is expectations pushes me to move forward. It inspires the team. It allows us to constantly learn and grow. It creates a bit of a striving culture. Expectations that will allow us to constantly improve. And here's the thing, all of that's true. But if I mistakenly have that either or approach, meaning that expectations is my leadership strategy, I over-focus on expectations to the neglect of grace, I will not live out those lovely words very long. And you know, and your team knows what fills in this box. What happens when expectations is overdone to the neglect of grace? Well, now actually, I'm just resentful. I'm resentful that like, this is impossible. I can't meet the mark. This is paradoxical, but engagement goes down because your teams are like, you know what, we'll never get there, so why bother? Burnout, frustration, a culture that you just feel like, is stressful and anxious. Well, this is my blind spot, because if I either or this tension, I will live here, and sometimes I'm not even aware of it. So what I've learned to do is say, okay, we got to be clear. What's the upsides of grace? What's the benefits of grace and understanding and empathy? And, the list is long. The fact that people on my team don't feel like they're just producing things, they're human beings, which means that I don't just value you for what you do. I value you for who you are. You don't have to be perfect all the time. When you can have grace not to be perfect all the time, engagement and psychological safety goes up. People in the team are willing to share what's on their mind, not as worried about saying the perfect thing. There's this shared humanity, so trust builds. That's the kind of environment that people want to come to and they want to stay in. So you'd say, well, Tim, that's your answer. Obviously grace is the value that you need to have, but here's the thing. If I over-focus on one side, I treat this like an either or, and I neglect the opposite, I won't live out those values. All of a sudden, I'm living down here. And this is not what's wrong with grace. It's what happens when I over focus on it to the neglect of expectations. Well, now we live in a culture of mediocrity. We're fine. Anything's good. Engagement goes down again because people don't feel like they're really being pushed. I believe, and I think there's a lot of research to back this up, we all want to be the best versions of ourselves. And I want to be in an environment that helps me cultivate that and seeing another. So now we've got this kind of mediocre quality of culture that doesn't keep people. So that's the first thing. And as I said, you can do this exercise, and I'll actually be happy to share with you the PowerPoint if it's helpful. Just put in whatever tension works for you. The next step is assess it. And gosh, this is so helpful in your teams because not everyone will agree, and that's fantastic. But it leads to a great conversation saying, okay, if this matters, how are we doing right now? And I've got assessments for all 6, and again, I'd be happy to share those with you. But for expectations, grace, quadrant 1 is where you do not want to be very long. You'd say, I think we're tanking on both ends. Low expectations, low grace. We're coasting, but we're also critical all the time. Quadrant 2 is one that I have to be careful because I can find myself here often. High expectations on myself, on others, not so high on the grace side. I'm driven, but I'm always kind of feeling disappointed. The opposite of that, and some of you may resonate with this, is quadrant 3, meaning lots of grace, lots of empathy and just factoring in real life, but pretty low on the expectation side these days, not pushing as hard as we could. I'm understanding, maybe a little underperforming. And then of course the 4th quadrant is where we want to spend more time in all the time. This is where you'd say, hey, it may not be 50-50, but I feel like we've got healthy levels of both. Healthy levels of both. Meaning that, there's a supportive environment and we're striving. And, I'd say to you, first of all, on your own, as a leader, assess where are you at. I don't live in quadrant 4 all the time, but I want to be mindful of when I'm not there. And I want to actually work hard to say, okay, what's it going to take to put me there? And hearing from the team can be helpful because, again, rarely will we all agree. So we can come up with great strategies on what would it allow us in this next quarter or in this next part of our strategic plan to spend more time in that 4th quadrant. And then that's where we get to this last element. And, there's a lot of action plans in the book around leveraging the tension. I've done research now in countries around the world, and it's pretty clear. Most people assume tension is bad, or the equivalent in other language. The word tension, bad, which means if I sense tension, I avoid it or I ignore it. We do that personally in our relationships. We do that in our teams. That's why we have team meetings where everyone nods and smiles, but then we have a meeting after the meeting where you find people who share your point of view. What I would say is instead, be that leader that instead of avoiding or ignoring, actually embraces it. Says, no, if I'm going to lead at my best, I am going to manage this tension well. And, there's a few characteristics that are pretty important if you're going to do that. So I'm going to ask you to just write down one more thing because the question becomes, why is this so hard? Why is this so hard? And I'm going to have you think in a moment about your opposite. I will say this, you've got the 6, you're like, okay, Tim, well, good, I'll take this and go. And yet living out this idea of managing tensions is a lot harder to do than talking about it. And years ago, I remember my son, I think he was 7 at the time. It was the first time he got into trouble at school, to the point that the teacher called home. So we had to deal with it, and he was upset. And I remember before bed, I was in his room and he was crying. And I generally said something to the effect of, Declan, it's all right. This is a life lesson. This is just one of life lessons. So you've got it, and we move on. And he kind of looked up, and he said, what do you mean? I said, well, there's just certain things that are life's lessons, and you just got to learn them, and it shapes your life. And so I left his room, and 20 minutes later, he came in and he had a notebook and a pen. And he said, Dad, he put him on my bed. He was like, I want you to write down all of life's lessons right now because I just want them all. I just want the answers right now. And I thought, oh, I wish that I could do that for you. It's just, as you know, not that easy. And the reason that it often is hard to manage these tensions is that we just want the answer. Just give me the 7 habits or the 5 steps. Just tell me how to solve it. Well, I can't do that, because as long as you're leading, you will always be wrestling with that tension. But I can give you 3 values or characteristics of a leader who can, as I refer to, lead with and. 3 values. Now, for you to really question, do I live out those values? I want you to do something for me in the last 5 minutes I have with you. I want you to just think about right now, and I use the term, who is your opposite? So maybe it's that person on your team. You value them, you care for them, but wow, it's almost like they're the yin to your yang. If you're talking about an organizational change, if you're for it, they're against it. If you're talking about kind of in focusing on quality, they're talking about the bottom line. It's just like, wow, we're just always the opposite. Maybe it's someone outside of work. Maybe it's based on your take on vaccines or lockdowns or other social issues. Like, wow, I care about this person, but they are on the other side. All right, so write their name down, because I want you to, again, it's easy to say, oh, I've got all those values. But when you think about this person, do you have these values? So the first value is the value of curiosity. Curiosity. I talked earlier about confidence. Well, we're going to talk now about curiosity. And curiosity is an interesting one, because curiosity is that you constantly are desiring to learn new perspectives. Curiosity means that you don't assume you're wrong, but you assume that you're missing something. A real curious person would just be described as inquisitive, questioning, open. When you think of this individual, this opposite, would you feel that they would describe you as curious? Have you been curious, not to switch sides or kind of jump on their positions, but to really understand them? Because here's the thing. You do not have to agree with someone to learn from them. You don't. I actually have learned sometimes the most around people that see the world very differently than me. And what I would say is that the best starting point to a question, if you want to grow in your curiosity, is help me understand. Help me understand. So rather than, saying, oh, but, or I don't agree, just say, hey, help me understand. I don't see it that way, and I really want to see where you're coming from. Help me understand. For me, help me understand has been a game-changing prompt, just to slow down my thinking, and that would kind of be the first one. So the next value is the value of what I call connection. We live in a world right now, and research is showing us, actually, Harvard just released research in the US that said, culturally in the US, we are more polarized than we have been since the Civil War. And I don't feel like that's changed a lot north of the border. There's division. We immediately want to know, are you on my side or your side? And, the media, social media algorithms are trying hard to make me feel like if you don't agree with me, then you're like, you're on the other side, which is interesting, because whether you're talking about, COVID views or organizational strategy issues, that opposite, I bet you have 95% of things in common that you share, values you have, things that you're aspiring to. You've actually just got a short list of things that you don't. And yet that short list can be that thing that puts you on the other side. So the second value is this value of connection. It means that you work hard as a leader to find common ground over division. Common connection means that you deliberately work hard to establish relationships with people see the world differently than you. You look to say, hey, if I'm going to understand this, I need to relate to it. I need to know someone who lives that way. And it means that, again, if you were described by others, you'd be described as a bridge builder more than a wall builder. You're someone who, for whatever reasons, can just really kind of connect. Now, here's the thing. You have to recognize that as someone who's managing tensions, even think of that opposite. You don't need to, exchange your viewpoints for theirs. You don't need to switch sides, but you might expand your viewpoints with theirs. There's a huge difference between exchanging views and expanding views. And the best prompt for you to be that leader who can build connection is starting sentences with, here's where we agree. Here's where we agree. Because again, there'll be a long list. But if you can really take the lead in saying, here's where I know you and I are on the same page. We're not in these areas, but I know we are here. You will invite that person into common ground. All right, here's the last piece. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to just cross your arms. I know this is all virtual, but cross your arms. Now with your arms crossed, just pay attention. Were you a left hand in, or a left hand out person? Or then sometimes you can be actually a both hands in person. There's no psychology around this, by the way. Don't worry about it. Whatever you were doing, do the opposite now. So if you were a left hand in, be a left hand out. If you're both hands in, be both hands out. And I bet already people are going, I don't do that. That's uncomfortable. Well, here's the thing. We live in a world that we really do want to be comfortable. And there's a place, I think every day I need part of my day where I'm in my comfort zone. But a quote that I've been saying over and over again, it's actually from author and Dr. PhD student Susan David. She says, discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. Discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. I mean, sometimes we actually got to push ourselves to be uncomfortable. And, I did an exercise, and if you want to try this, it's a fascinating exercise. It takes a half hour. But I was told, I want you to come up with 3 scenarios of where you look back in your adult life and you don't feel that you showed up well. You would say, gosh, not that it's a huge regret, but you're like, that's not me at my best. And then you need to look at what's consistent about those stories. And what was consistent for me was in all 3 scenarios, I chose what was comfortable over what was discomfort. I knew what I needed to do, but I chose comfort. Now, what was fascinating is that the 3 examples of where I had to go next, which is come up with 3 examples where you feel that was the best version of me. That was me showing up well. All 3 examples were situations where I chose discomfort because of a higher purpose. I chose to be uncomfortable out of a higher purpose. And ultimately what this is leading us towards is this last value of courage. It's fascinating. We teach our kids, courage is a core value. We watch superhero movies constantly. We know that this matters. We want to see it in action. But really what courage means to us on a day-to-day level as a leader is being able to be uncomfortable, to actually moving beyond the comfort of just finding people who agree with me. In our meetings, wanting pushback, wanting challenge, saying, no, I don't want the meeting after the meeting to happen. I know you don't see this the way I see it. Bring it to the table. Courage means that we actually can support views that I know may frustrate other people. And I know it may disappoint other people. Ultimately, courage is choosing to sometimes be uncomfortable. And, the prompt that I would give you to really grow in this kind of value of courage is yes, and. Yes, and. When you start to immediately identify, I don't agree with that, look for areas where you're on common ground and say, yes, and, not but, not or, but yes, and. So I know that we wanted to have some time for questions. So I just would say this. First of all, again, thank you. This has been an honor for me to be back at Brock and to share with you some of the work that I've been focused on for the last little bit. All 6 of those tensions are outlined in those assessments in Lead with And. Reach out to me. I'd love to reconnect with some of you and meet some of you. But do know that I'd love to help you in any way I can. And you can download the slides I've used at Lead with And. So those are yours. As well as I do, the best way to learn something is not to hear me talk about it. It's actually to try teaching it. So, take a slide or 2, take it to your team and get their thoughts. I guarantee it will be worth it. So with that in mind, Jewel, I'm going to hand things over to you. I think we have about 10 minutes left. So if there's any questions, I am game to answer.
We do have a few that have started to come in, and probably a few more as we
I
will be
gotta
talking.
adjust my mic. Can you just say that one more time?
We do have a few. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you just fine.
Perfect. So the first one here is, what qualities do you think leaders today lack most?
That's a really interesting question. I think that we could have great dialogue if we had everybody in a room right now. But I think that often leaders don't have the ability to manage confidence and humility effectively. I find that when I work with leaders, whether it's in a executive boardroom or a coaching session, people often in an either or world are all confident or overly humble, but they don't hold those in tension. And what's interesting is holding an intention doesn't mean watering down each side or compromising. It means actually doing both fully, meaning that, hey, I can stand in my confidence. I actually can give people the trust to move forward, to buy in, to actually know that we can do this. And I don't have all the answers. And I'm going to learn something from all of us, and we're going to learn as we go. And I find that when, I found this to be the case time and time and time again, people often strongly lean towards one side over the other. But when you look at leaders that just thrive, in results, but also in their team, even their personal resiliency, they often manage that tension better than the average leader, being confident and humble.
Confident and humble. Interesting. And the next one here, it talks about how do you keep your team motivated despite conflicts and obstacles?
So one thing that I would say is incredibly effective is just starting to use this language of tensions. The team, we are, getting into some science and biology, we are DNA kind of coded to avoid pain. And that saves us well when it's a hot, pot on a stove or something like that. But it doesn't serve us well when we stand back from real dialogue in a team setting. What happens is we become so nice that we don't actually take advantage of differences of opinions. And when we can start to, even if you took that list of 6 tensions and identified 1 or 2 of them and start using that language with your team, even give them the list and say, hey folks, what's the 1 or 2 that we got to get comfortable with? And just say, this is the good stuff. There's lots of tensions that are bad and dysfunctional and we want to avoid, but this tension, I want us to tap into it. And the leader has to make it safe. So when we're feeling a little bit of, tension between profit and purpose, or, between change and stability, that's good. We should be. If we're all on the same page all the time, something's wrong. The other thing, the leader is the person where when you have that vulnerable conversation in the meeting that, someone actually chose discomfort, but it served everyone well, go to them after and say, thank you. Thank you. If they challenge you, say, first of all, thank you. I want this. I don't want to get my way all the time. I want to get the best outcome all the time. And that's not always going to be me winning. So you as a leader have to make it safe for your team. But I'll tell you this, I've worked with teams all over the world, and the teams that are the most effective, the ones that people actually can't wait to get to their next team meeting, would be scary to most because they don't hold back. There's a strong level of respect and they care about each other, but they don't agree all the time. They get into really good debate, but it's done in a respectful way. And they realize this isn't the stuff that we deal with as leaders. Rarely are we dealing with situations that are wrong and right. We're dealing with situations that are right and right. We have to, as a leadership group or a group as a team, manage complexity, which means we're not going to agree all the time. And that's good. So you've got to make that safe for your team.
Speaking of team and building teams and adding new individuals to the team, what are some of the things that you look for when adding new team members, and why?
Oh gosh, that's a huge question. I think, it's funny, I'll link it to my talk around tensions because, I think that there are a few pieces to, there's a tension that I think you need to be mindful of when adding a team. And it's this idea of celebrating diversity and also fostering commonality. And some people are maybe upset or uncomfortable, and just let me explain it. It means that the last thing I want is a team of people like me, and that can mean my background. It could mean, this could be age, ethnicity, everything. I actually want a diverse team where we celebrate differences. We celebrate, the uniqueness that all of us bring, and we actually celebrate commonalities where we're actually aligned, and those things that that we all agree on, and we build that culture on those values and things that we share. And I think the piece that I'm always thinking about is, and I'm in a process right now of hiring, does this person bring some diversity that's going to make us better? Because I want that. This is an opportunity right now for us to grow based on learnings and different styles and personalities. And from a chemistry fit, is this someone who I think is going to also love kind of the commonalities and that the camaraderie we have about the things that we share? And for me, that's been really helpful. And I've had to push myself on it because it doesn't happen. That doesn't happen by chance. That managing that tension happens by choice.
Awesome. And probably time for one more here. How do you maintain your leadership development and growth, Tim?
So, I mean, I feel like I'm what would be called middle-aged now. I'm just a few years off 50. Yeah, that's a really interesting question for me right now. I just came back, actually. I flew home last night from a conference out west. And, one of the things that I recognize is moving back into travel, I am no longer going to just fly in and fly out to teach. I will always make time to learn. So I would have said, okay, if I'm going to go, I'm going to actually sit into Greg McEwen's session on essentialism and Amber Max on technology. Like, I gotta carve out space for learning. The other piece that I would say is, and this is a really interesting interdependency. There is a place, this goes to confidence and humility. I have a responsibility to come alongside, I believe, younger emerging leaders. So I try to put myself in roles where I'm being mentored and I'm also a mentor. But what I'm finding, I'm in a couple mentoring relationships right now. I feel like some of the most amazing learning that I'm getting is from some of these young emerging leaders that I'm mentoring, because I'm learning just about how the workplace is changing and about, even things like technologies that I'm finding scary that don't need to be. So I think that, if anyone would be where I am, which is I would call middle age, you've got to keep yourself around younger leaders, and not just to teach them, to learn from them. Because I feel like the moment that I'm just teaching, the next generation, everyone loses.
And I think you've just also answered another question there about mentorship and who your mentors may be. So young leaders as mentors. That's fantastic. Well, we're almost approaching the end of the time that we have here together. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Tim, for coming here, for sharing your thoughts about your new book, and sharing the concept of polarity and leading with Anne. I'm very much looking forward to getting a copy and reading it as well, but I've also picked up a number of items from your talk here. So thank you so very much for being here and for sharing your thoughts.
Appreciate it.
And I also want to thank all of those individuals that have joined us today as well. Goodman Group is a community-focused learning and development services provider that works to support professionals, businesses, and entrepreneurs pursuing growth through professional development certificate programs, executive education, consulting services, and startup support. On the slides that are coming up, you will see information relating to our upcoming programs. And it is with pleasure to share with you the nonprofit leadership certificate program that is scheduled for May and June of this year. These sessions will, these live virtual sessions that are instructor-led are scheduled for Tuesdays and Thursdays. And the information around this you can see on our screen. Please feel free to reach out to a member of the team, a member of the Goodman Group team, for questions that you may have. And recognizing that many of our nonprofits are challenged in terms of financials, being one of the challenging areas, feel free to reach out for opportunities with funding and discounting as well, especially available for the nonprofit sector. I'm also pleased to share with you that our wine business management certificate program is going to be offered later this year in month of July. And with this being one of our premier programs with panelists and speakers and instructors from virtually around the world in places that are known for wine, including places like the Burgundy region and the Champagne region in France, the Sonoma region in California, and other parts of the world where there are representatives and speakers and our instructors and faculty members who are part of this program. So this program is a one-week in-person experience here in Niagara, and it will involve time on campus as well as taking a tour of some of the wineries and being at some of the wineries for some of the learning days in Niagara. The sessions will be facilitated in person, of course, and the details of this program are available on the screen. So again, in terms of questions, feel free to reach out to the team with any questions that you may have. Now, with that said, I want to take this opportunity to thank Tim again, and also thank all of you that are watching us live, but also those who may be watching this in the recorded format. And wishing you all very well until next time that we will be coming together. Stay safe and take good care.